Hello, welcome to Citrin Cooperman's chat today, and I have the pleasure of introducing everyone to Jon Radoff. He is the CEO of Beamable. Now, Jon, before founding Beamable, you built one of the first commercial games on the internet, took a web content management company public, grew a game advertising network, and launched mobile games played by millions of people, including Game of Thrones Ascent and Star Trek Timelines. For any of you gamers out there, I'm sure you've seen those games and more. But Jon, you just, in the last year and a half, kind of pivoted from the gaming into building a gaming platform. So what made you shift from making games to being the platform for other game designers out there?
Thanks, Connie. First of all, I just have a passion for the craft of game making. I love people who make games. And at Disruptor Beam, we had this incredible opportunity to build several games, as you said, for very popular television shows like Game of Thrones and Star Trek. And we had a hell of a lot of fun doing that. Some of these games reached incredible audiences, over 10 million people. But what I ultimately realized is that because of some of the background that you referred to there, like I had done things other than making games. I had built ad networks and built enterprise technology companies. I felt that I had a real calling to do more than us just making one game after another, because there was an opportunity there actually to build thousands of games. We wouldn't be building all of them, but we could support millions of game developers. Some people don't realize this, but there's over 5 million game developers in the world now. So there's a huge number of people building this stuff, but it's a super challenging market to build things in for a lot of reasons. It's a hit-driven business. It's hard to connect with consumers. It's technically complicated. It has all the risks of the entertainment business combined with all the risks of the software business. And I thought I could really help take some of those software risks off the table, help game developers really just focus on what they love to do and what really the players of games care about, which is build fun experiences. And we could help support them by providing what we call the live game services layer for them, which means all the live social and online commerce elements of their game, which is super important if you want to build a sustainable game business. They bring the creativity, we bring that stuff to the table. Then I could help support thousands and thousands of game studios. So that I felt a calling for that. And as you said, we made the decision to pivot away from our business as a game development studio.
So you made that decision actually prior to the pandemic, but
I did.
How has, or maybe it hasn't, but how has the pandemic impacted your business and your business model?
Well, the pandemic was a surprise, to put it lightly.
If you could have predicted that, then you're in the wrong business. But yeah, it was a surprise.
It was a true black swan event. Yeah, so the pivot was already underway, actually. So at the end of 2019, I had brought in a new management team to help me execute this change into what would be a software as a services business, a SaaS business. And we realized that we would have to choose whether we wanted to be in a SaaS business or do game development. There's a couple of exceptions out there of companies that try to do both, but it's really, really hard because both of those businesses are obsessions of their own. It's an obsession to build a great SaaS product. It's an obsession to build games, and ultimately realized we were fooling ourselves to think we could do both of those things. So it was already in process. And by the end of 2019, in fact, we had sold the biggest game that we had, Star Trek Timelines. Really successful game. At the point we sold it, it had lifetime revenues of over 100 million. I'm sure it'll do that much again. But we sold that to a company called Tilting Point, who is a game publisher. And that had gone well. I should say, like, out of the 4 games that we shipped, 3 of them did pretty well. One of them didn't do well, and actually, that's some of the risk that's involved in game development, which
Right.
is you can spend a lot of capital on a game and be left in a pretty poor position if you have one product that doesn't do well. So we had one that didn't do well, and we did need to come into 2020 and clean a lot of that up. And we had a much different idea about how we were going to pursue like the cleanup plan coming into 2020, mostly involving bringing in new investor capital and rebooting the company around this idea. Now, the pandemic hit, and by March, things were pretty bleak from the investor world side of things.
Right.
Games were
Right.
actually doing well, interestingly enough. Like games were way up revenue wise. Games, we had just sold our biggest game,
Well,
but lots of
and games have definitely continued to explode during the pandemic as people have sought in-home entertainment. But yeah.
yeah. So
Oh,
games have done well. And I think games, people could already see signs of games doing well right out of the gate in
right.
February, March. But we needed capital to survive as a company and to actually complete the pivot that we were executing, because we were literally right in the middle of it. So, 2020 was a very complex year for us. We tapped into every source of capital we could. We raised capital from our existing shareholders primarily. They wrote us a new convertible note. We tapped into the PPP program.
Yep.
So we were able to keep going. Really, the only reason we were able to go past 2020 is we started signing up customers, is what it came down to. So we built a good platform. It was built on a lot of the technology that we had created back at Disruptor Beam. But really, it was more about the team that we brought along with us. The team
Sure.
had all this incredible knowledge of how to do live game services. We still needed to productize all these lines of code, because the lines of code probably weren't worth that much just on their, or anything really on their own. We needed to actually shape a product around it. We needed to work with game studios who had the kind of problems we were trying to solve. Fortunately, we were able to sign up a lot of game studios.
Oh, good.
We signed up 100 game studios in 2020 or shortly thereafter. And that really helped us with product market fit and perfecting exactly how we productize it. So we ended up putting ourselves in a position where, through a combination of a whole reorg process that we had to do to clean up the balance sheet and all this old baggage coming from Disruptor Beam, coupled with a new venture capital firm, Companion Ventures, coming in and leading around along with Grand Banks, who was a firm that had funded Disruptor Beam previously. That plus a constellation of other investors, some of them are original investors, some of them brand new investors, that then brought $5 million in capital into the company, and which we just announced a few weeks back. So we were able to get through the process of rebooting the company with this vision of delivering software infrastructure to the game business. But 2020 was an interesting year to navigate that financially.
So it was a little different getting your VC funding than you have in the past, but you also had a, if you will, a personality with your offices and how your teams work together. And I had been in Disruptor Beam's offices some time ago, and it was like a large living room, even though everybody had workstations and very collegial and collaborative. And that changed. Uh, what changes did you have to make? How did you adapt? Um, and as you envision us gently opening back up, what are you going to pull from this past year that you think might be a best practice? And what are you hoping to get back to?
Yeah. Well, we're not in a rush to go back to a physical office space, even though we were in a nice office. At this point, it's been over a year since I've been in the same room with any of my co-founders or
Yeah.
coworkers in the company. We've been operating as a virtual company this whole time. And admittedly, we're all looking forward to the day we can have a barbecue or something and hang out together and have some social activities so that we
Yeah.
engage together. But we've had to do this all on remote. We reshaped the company culture from the ground up again. One of the last things we actually did in person before the whole pandemic took over was we had an all hands with the small team of 12 of us who were going to restart this whole company, to kind of figure out what the culture of the company was going to be. And at its core, like, there's a few things. The one I'll talk about, though, is like, it's just this idea that we fight for the game maker, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's all these millions of game makers in the world, and we're going to be the company that really fights for them and gives them the software that they need. And that purpose behind the company has really been compelling, I think, to all of us, because all of us working in the company, to us, it's not just about making a SaaS product because SaaS products are cool to make and can make a bunch of money. That's true. But what's important about it is we all come from a background of either playing games or actually making games. And we feel this deep empathy for people that are in that line of work and are betting their careers on the next game that they're going to create. And we could really help them. So I think that culture and that mantra of we fight for the game maker has kind of kept us excited, kept us engaged at all the times that it's been complicated over the last year. But we did have to reshape the company around virtual meetings and
Right.
creating rituals around it. So, we have a kickoff every week, like clockwork, in Zoom. There's daily stand-ups. We have a social hour at the end of each week at 4 p.m. on Fridays. So, which is something we actually did kind of carry over from the old company, but now it's all virtual and we hang out together on Zoom and have a drink and play games. So
And
we've had to.
do you think you're going to go back to a hybrid model where you still do a lot virtually? I imagine everybody will enjoy having the real cocktail hour instead of the virtual cocktail hour, but maybe not.
Yeah, we consider ourselves to be a remote first company. So
Okay.
I wouldn't rule out in office at some point in our future if it serves an important purpose for the company. But we have no plans to do that this year or even next year. Like, we'll do it if it's something that we feel is important for the company. But what's actually more important is that we've been able to actually change the way we bring talent into the company
Sure.
and the way we work with people over the last year. So now we're working with people from all over the world. For example, I mean, there's someone who works for us. I think the term people like this call themselves as digital nomad, where they go anywhere in the world. And he's a American citizen, but he lives in Costa Rica now, and he's lived in the Caribbean. And I think this has given us actually the ability to hire people who are incredibly talented, get them to work for us from wherever they are, anywhere in the world. And I think that it's allowed us to reset even the way we think about running the company, so that now it's going to be less in the future about, people in Boston where we're based, although, the majority of our people are still in Boston because they came with us from the old company. But now we're adding people from all over the world. And what will be important about the culture that we'll have to carry forward is, even if there's someday, a couple of years down the road, for example, where we have a physical office, or maybe even if we have a co-working office sooner than that, we're going to have to carry forward the cultural structure, the
Yeah.
rituals, the remote first thinking around how we share information, how we have meetings, how we have one-on-ones. All of those different rituals and practices will carry into the future, because what we won't want to have happen is actually what I think happens to a lot of quote unquote hybrid model companies is, you have like the nucleus that forms the physical office, and then everyone else is like a helper on remote, and they become
A little more
not
fringe, a little, yeah,
they're not tied into the social structure of the
right.
company. Therefore, they miss out on the culture of the company. So culture in companies is very, very important to me. And I want to make sure that we're carrying that forward in the future, whatever our structure is.
Yeah. Well, that's a challenge that I think a lot of companies will face, because I do think a lot of companies have found that one of the silver linings is you can hire top talent and it doesn't matter where they are. I know in my own practice, we service clients and we don't have to be um, in their marketplace. Um, that said, you've talked about your corporate culture. What about your outbound with your clients? Have you been able to, has it been the same, better, worse in your ability to connect? And certainly you were pivoting, but prior businesses had clients similarly. So, compare and contrast what it used to be like with what it's like now. And for some people, they've found they've had the ability to access clients because they don't have to physically go there. Everybody accepts the whole remote Zoom like we are
Yeah.
now.
So game making is a global business. There are
Right.
game creators in every country of the world and every time zone. So it's something that we were already doing before any of this. I think what operating as a virtual company as well is that every day we're also having to learn how to do that very effectively amongst ourselves. So a lot of the same lessons we're learning there, we can apply with our customers. But we use Discord, which is an online chat and conferencing software. So like we have a Discord community for our customers. Um, we make ample use of video conferencing and online whiteboarding. So all of that stuff, I think every company is going to have to be a lot better at that from now on, because I think that while we're going to see a return to some amount of travel, I think people are going to be a lot more hesitant in the future to just jump on a plane and fly across the country or even over to another country just to have a bunch of meetings, when they know after this year that 90% of the value, if not 100% of the value, doesn't require that, and it
Yeah.
takes all that extra time and a lot of money to do that travel, and you can be a lot more efficient this way. So there's certain things that I think are hard to recapture: the barbecues, the real life cocktail parties, the networking events are a little bit harder to pull off. But even frankly, on the networking side, one of the things I've discovered over the last few weeks is this platform called Clubhouse,
Yeah.
which got started last year. I formed a thing about a month ago called the Game Industry Cocktail Hour, which literally it was going to be an online event for like an hour for people to hang out if they worked in the game industry. And then to my surprise, like no one ever wanted to leave the room. Just one succession of people would come in and there would be like a changing of the guard every few hours. So it's literally run 24 hours a day for over a month now, almost 5 weeks as of Friday. And now we're doing all kinds of other online networking things. So I don't know that even conventions will.
I was gonna ask you, like once upon a time, you go to conventions and you display your latest or soon to be latest and greatest, and so it's interesting to hear you say that. So, you think conventions may be a thing of the past for you guys?
Well, let me distinguish conventions versus conferences. Conventions in gaming anyway, tends
Yep.
to imply you're showing off product, and there is sort of a discovery aspect to that where people are coming by your booth or something in an exhibit hall and getting to experience it, and you create an experience around it. So I think things like that will come back.
Mm-hmm.
But conferences, which is sort of like the educational and networking aspect. The game industry has a ton of conferences with education and networking. And I've been a little underwhelmed by the attempts at trying to do the electronic versions of the same
Okay.
thing over the last year. Sometimes conventions, conferences, they get kind of glommed together. But like the Clubhouse thing I was referring to, what I think we've actually figured out how to reproduce was the hallway discussions that always happen
Sure.
around these educational seminars and stuff. and it's been highly effective. I've seen people get jobs through it. I've seen people learning things in real time and making connections and building bridges between communities. So we're learning how to do that in the midst of the pandemic. And I think there's a lot of reasons this will continue. So even if you have conferences if conferences make a comeback, that's fine. But keep in mind that when you're talking about global industries and people from all over the world and the high cost of travel, the biggest conference in my industry, which is called GDC, the Game Developers
Very.
Conference, it's like 25,000 people that descend on San Francisco, and you really can't spend less than $1,000 a night plus
Oh,
air travel to be there.
hotel, whenever they have the conference in San Francisco, hotel rates, skyrocket. And then you have, jam-packed venues that are mob scenes where you can barely walk across the room. Oh yeah, no.
Yeah. And listen, there is a part of me that misses certain aspects of that. Like there's a
Absolutely.
never ending party at the St. Regis
Yep.
lobby and the W cocktail lounge, and it runs for like a week. Like I would love to be able to go to that and see some of my friends from the industry and hang out with them and network with them. So I do want to return to that. However, 25,000 people is a small percentage of the number of people that actually work in games. And online formats, the potential for that is to actually be far more scalable.
Sure.
And to fit a lot more schedules that people have available to them, and allow people to be a lot more budget conscious.
So I'm kind of chuckling because you're answering one of my next questions, which was some of the best practices that have evolved from this. And you are right. The virtual impact and the ability to access people. A physical conference, 25,000 people, add a couple of zeros behind that, and virtually you can touch a bunch of people. So that's great.
I think what this whole what the lockdown and the isolation has forced is not only to use these virtual tools,
Mm-hmm.
but actually we've gotten a lot better at processing information and relationships much more real time.
Sure.
So it would sort of create these islands of conversation around conferences and stuff, and you kind of come into it and then come out of it again. And there'd be a certain set of things that would always be a little bit time deferred. Like you weren't not necessarily talking about the actual zeitgeist of the moment. You were talking about like whatever people had in mind a few weeks earlier or even a few months earlier when they established what the seminars would be about and things like that. So we're actually having to be much more real time. Like conversations are now coming together in Clubhouse as well as social media and other things, which are much more about what people are grappling with, like literally today. And if not today, maybe just 1 hour ago, like, and they're
Sure.
coming together much more dynamically around that and encountering the issues and encountering the people who care about it. So it's very, very interesting. It feels like we're actually, our rate of progress and development is accelerating as a result of
Okay.
all of this.
So because everything is literally 100% virtual now, and you've talked a little bit about the corporate culture, but companies are finding that there's value in different traits in their employees that they didn't value previously. How have you leveraged some of those traits in your team? Um, what have you seen people, rise up to during this pandemic as you've gone through all this?
Well, I work with a super talented group of people, and I feel lucky every day to work with them. I feel like they chose me
Mm-hmm.
more than anything else to allow myself to become their leader in this enterprise. So like I feel like this is different across industries for sure, but looking at it through the lens of the software industry, anyone who's in software is in super high demand, and
Sure,
now they can work anywhere in the world.
sure.
So I think what that means is companies have an opportunity to be a lot more authentic, meaning that their workforce is populated by people who really, really, really care about the problem they're solving. And I think that we've been lucky in that respect. And speaking of company culture, like I talked about, we fight for the game maker, but also authenticity is a very core value to the company in the sense that, like, we really want to bring, as we build the company, we want to continue to bring people to the company who have that deep empathy for our customers, who have made games themselves or care about the craft of making games at a fundamental level. So I guess that's how I look at it. I don't know that when you talk about the values of people and how it shifted around, I think it's maybe made it possible to allow people to actually be who they truly are. And if you're the right company for people like that, that's a huge advantage.
Now, I'm a bean counter. And so, you've been talking about your development team and all that. Have you had to make adjustments to your back office, HR and accounting, or were they pretty fluid previous to this and adapted to remote?
We pretty much rebooted all of that stuff because at Disruptor Beam as a game studio,
Right,
at one point the company had over 100 people in it.
right.
So a lot of our systems of the kind that you're talking about were
Yeah,
really optimized for a company of that size that was also thinking that it would get bigger than that. So, we have completely reverted to like startup mode in terms of our software. We're not quite on QuickBooks. We still do use Intact. That was maybe the one thing that we kept. But other than that, like tools, we shed a lot of the more cumbersome HR tech and things like that. We use a PEO, so it's we just want to be super focused on our customers
right.
and product market fit. Like every day, the main thing I think about every day more than anything is product market fit, and also understanding what is the trajectory of the market. What is it now? What is it going to look like a year or two out, even 5, 10 years out? And making sure that we're making the right decisions around that. And that's what's important. And then everything else, like systems, spreadsheets, yeah, we need some of those things.
Right,
I don't want to make it sound like we don't have controls around financial modeling and whatnot,
right.
but it's much more geared to being a startup all over
Yeah.
again.
So we have our 2-minute warning.
Oh, okay.
This is flowed. We do have one question from one of the attendees, and it is, what is one key lesson you've learned during this crisis? So you've mentioned a lot of things, but is there a key lesson, or is there one thing that really stands out for you?
Um, it'll sound a little bit trite, but it's really all about the power that occurs when you recruit a really talented
Yep.
team and allow them to do what they're great at. So we were fortunate enough to have brought in a couple of people at like the C level, 12-person
Yep.
company, couple of additional C level people. Trapper, my COO, who helped me on like the business operational marketing sales side, and Ali, the CTO of Beamable, who had been one of the leadership engineers at the company, had been the architect of the platform technology that we're now building around at Beamable, and really just giving them essentially the permission to make the decisions, to run with it, to actually own important parts of the business, and
Sure.
then not stop that sort of cultural attitude towards ownership anywhere in the company. So that sense of ownership and passion for game makers, all these things that we've been talking about, is everybody in the company, whether it's engineers, UX designers, people who are dealing with customers in the community every day. All of those functions within the company really have been unleashed to go and do it. And I think that, frankly, it's a little bit different than I've done things in the past. So
Sure.
game making in some ways is a bit of an auteur enterprise, similar to making a movie. Like, there are different ways that it can be done. Sometimes it can be done in like cabals and teams and whatnot. But most games that I see successful, there's sort of like a director mentality, and they carry forth
Yep.
the vision of the game and execute on it. And that person oftentimes they can become a little bit of a dictator. And I think that's what I was when I did, say, Game of Thrones Ascent. I was kind of a and I was also I was a little bit of a slightly different kind of dictator with Star Trek timelines. And the other games we did sort of had different models of approaching that each time. So I was kind of the guy cracking the whip, saying, this is what the product has to be, and you're going to build it for me, and you do your craft really well, but I'm going to tell you exactly what I want, and you come back with it. And that isn't the way we're doing things at Beamable today.
Okay.
It's much more about, it's really much more about tasking the team with problems and letting them figure out how to solve it. And frankly, there's so many problems in our market. Like, the hardest part is just prioritizing
Yeah.
and making sure we can align it to the
So
market.
John, I have a million more questions, but we've run out of time. This has flown. I hope 2021 is good to you guys. Hopefully you guys will double, triple, quadruple in size. And I greatly appreciate your time today, and Citron Cooperman thanks you. Can't wait to check back in with you in a couple of months and see how everything's going.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's fun to talk about this stuff, and my pleasure for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye, John.
Okay, thank you.